Hello, and welcome in. You are watching The Sequence in the Cellar, another episode of examining the evidence in the case of JonBenet Ramsey. In today's episode, we will go down into the basement and examine the sequence of events that took place by revisiting the trips taken by both Fleet White and John Ramsey on the 26th of December in 1996. We will also take a closer look at the light switches in the wine cellar, which will lead to a question that I don't think has ever been asked, but may be a critical one to answer. Let's begin by laying out the order of visits made to the basement, the who, the when, so we can establish a baseline understanding of the comings and goings of that morning, and bring the timeline of events to the forefront so we can navigate our way through the muck and muddle in the basement. Sergeant Paul Reichenbach, the night shift patrol supervisor, was finishing up his work when he overheard Officer French dispatched to 755 15th Street. Reichenbach rushed over and met French at the front door, and after an initial briefing, he conducted a search of all floors, including the basement. Reichenbach noted that a white door at the far end of the basement was secured at the top by a block of wood. He tried to open the door but stopped when it became apparent that it couldn't be a point of entry or exit from the home. I know a lot of people believe Officer French was the first officer to search the basement. He wasn't. It was Reichenbach. Fleet White, John Ramsey's good friend, arrived at the Ramsey home circa 6:30 a.m. and within 15 minutes, White searched the basement for JonBenet. It's important to note that at this time, White had not been told by anyone that a ransom note had been found inside the home. So White went to the basement, calling out for JonBenet. White would actually open the door to the wine cellar on this trip, which we will examine thoroughly in a moment. It is believed that Officer French was the next person to search the basement that morning. Like Reichenbach, he came across the same white door that was secured by the wooden block on a screw. French was looking for possible exit points, and since no one could have gone through the door and secured it from the inside, he moved on. The fourth person to search the basement that morning was John Ramsey. This was a solo trip, not to be confused with the trip he later took with Fleet White just after 1 p.m. when Ramsey found JonBenet's body. According to Ramsey's own statements made in his 97 and 98 interviews, he could have been the first or the last of the men to search the basement that morning. However, this isn't in our line of inquiry today, so we will examine this at a later time. Instead, we will first zero in on Fleet White's morning search of the basement and the trip he took with Ramsey just after 1 p.m. As I briefly mentioned earlier, shortly after Fleet White arrived at the Ramsey home, he conducted a search for JonBenet in the basement. Fleet White entered the doorway on the right first, which is dubbed the train room, where he noticed the middle basement window was broken but closed and unlatched, or just how you see it here. There was a blue American Tourister suitcase standing flush against the wall. White pulled it away from the wall to get a closer look at the window and look for broken glass. He placed a small kernel of glass that he found on the windowsill before moving on to the other side of the basement. White moved through the small passage on the left until he came to the white door that was secured with a wooden peg in the down position. White opened the cellar door, looked in, and when he couldn't find a light switch, closed the door and returned upstairs. White couldn't remember if he re-secured the wooden peg on the top of the door or not. So, this is obviously a point of pause here. The critical question or itch I have had for a long time is, why couldn't Fleet White find the light switch when he peeked inside the dark, windowless room? There were two light switches located inside the wine cellar. Most people are aware of the awkwardly located light switch on the inside right wall of the wine cellar. This light switch was just 2 feet inside the door and 2 feet off the floor, making this switch nearly impossible to find if you had never been inside the cellar prior to that day. However, there is a second light switch inside the cellar, located in just a position where one would usually find one. This switch was just inside the doorway on the left. In your life, whenever you have visited an unfamiliar place for the first time, a new home, a hotel room, or any other place that has a light switch, the first thing you instinctively do if you walk into a dark room is reach for the light switch. And without looking, your hand usually finds the switch where it normally is. So, why didn't Fleet White? Now, to be fair, during my investigation, I came across some information that this light switch in the cellar was not code compliant and was about a foot higher than the usual standard. However, in this clip from the great Cold Case Files with Bill Curtis, you can visually see not only where the light switch was located, but also the automatic ease in which it was found. I've always pondered this question, that is it possible that White perhaps did find this light switch on the left and he flipped it on, but no light illuminated? Maybe this is something White had held closest to his vest, or perhaps he told the police in one of his interviews and it has been held back. The implications are indeed break the case kind of stuff. Is it possible that hours later, when John Ramsey opened the door to the cellar with White just a hallway behind him, that he may have witnessed Ramsey flip on the same light switch he had tried earlier and was miffed that the lights now came on? So, what light switch did John Ramsey use to flip the light on? It was 1 p.m. when Linda Arndt asked John Ramsey to go through the house and search from top to bottom for anything that was missing or out of place. Ramsey grabbed White and they immediately beelined for the basement. Ramsey led White through the train room doorway on the right. While there, White points out the broken basement window to John, and Ramsey shrugs it off and tells White that he had broken the window in the summer to get in the house because he had forgotten his keys. This sequence alone will be addressed at a later time. For now, let's continue on with what happens next. Ramsey moved from the train room and into the cluttered hallway on the left and made his way to the wine cellar door. Fleet White had just closed a closet and was about a length of the hallway behind him. Ramsey reached up and turned the wooden peg and opened the cellar door. White heard John say, "Oh my God, oh my God," and as White approached the door, Ramsey flipped on the wine cellar light switch. But which light switch? This is a minor piece of minutia that might seem minor, but it's not. Did White see Ramsey hit the switch on the left, or lounge to his right and flip the lower light switch? This is something that has never been fully addressed, but should have been. We also know, in the moments after JonBenet was brought upstairs by John, Detective Linda Arndt instructed Fleet White to stand guard at the top of the basement stairs. Instead, White rushed back down the stairs straight to the wine cellar. He picked up the duct tape and handled a cigar box that was lying on the floor. This reactionary behavior seems to indicate that White was in absolute disbelief about something. Was it the light switch, or maybe he was flummoxed as to why he hadn't seen JonBenet when he peeked inside the wine cellar earlier, and how he had just seen John find her before he had turned on the light. Whatever it was, Fleet White wanted to see for himself. Moving on to the other elephant in the room, how did Ramsey see or know JonBenet was in the wine cellar as soon as he opened the door and before he switched on the light? The Boulder police conducted a test and measured the ambient and reflected light inside the wine cellar with the door open and the lights out to verify what could and could not be seen. The test showed there was not enough light to see anything in the dark unless the viewer had spent time getting accustomed to the darkness. So let's now examine the interviews and some of the narratives told about this sequence in the cellar. First up is the CNN interview given just 6 days after JonBenet's death. Here, Ramsey tells us that he did turn on the light when he walked into the cellar.
And one of the detectives asked me and my friend who was there to go through every inch of the house, see if there's anything that was unusual or abnormal that looked out of place.
Looking for clues.
I think she was asking us to do that more to give us something to do, to occupy our mind. And so we started in the basement and we're just looking and we have one room in the basement that when I opened the door, there are no windows in that room, and I turned the light on, and
She was in the room.
Sure. I hope that.
From here, it gets a whole lot of convoluted. In Ramsey's subsequent interviews in 1997, 98, and in 2001, John isn't exactly clear if he even turned on the light at all. In 1997, when asked, "Did you turn the light on?" Ramsey responded, "Probably. I don't remember specifically turning it on, but probably would have." Later, in the same interview, when going over this sequence in the cellar, Ramsey was asked, "You may or may not have turned the light on?" Thomas adds, "You don't know, in all fairness?" And Ramsey tells him, "In fact, I don't remember." In 1998, Lou Smith asked Ramsey, "Do you remember turning on the light?" And Ramsey's reply was, "I don't think I did." Then, in Ramsey's deposition in 2001, while under oath, there's this.
Go to the cellar door.
I don't know.
When you opened the cellar door, can you describe, to the best of your recollection today, what it was that you saw?
I saw a white blanket, and I knew immediately I'd found JonBenet.
Had you turned the light on, or?
I don't remember turning the light on.
So you can see that Ramsey is pretty definitive in his official interviews and deposition that he in fact doesn't remember if he turned on the light or not, and says he doesn't think he did. And yet, in the Ramsey's book, The Death of Innocence, Ramsey doesn't even mention the light scenario. And in The Other Side of Suffering, John's second book, John, while recounting the events, says he fumbled to flip the light on. Why is Ramsey so descriptive here if he doesn't even remember if he had turned on the light or not? This is dichotomous. Why say you turned on the light while on the public stage, the CNN interview, and in his book, but officially when questioned by the police or while under oath, Ramsey states the opposite? Why is this sequence or scenario, like so many other things in this case, this convoluted? In my analysis, I surmise that as time went on in the investigation, as the fluid of information funneled down through the various sources and onto the newspapers and cable news, certain information was learned, such as finding out about White's initial trip to the basement and perhaps what he had told the police about the trip he took when Ramsey found JonBenet. When it comes to the light and his behavior before turning it on, or did he, Ramsey may be leveraging somewhat against what perhaps White may have told the police. Remember that in the hours after the discovery of JonBenet's body, John Ramsey's lawyer friend, Mike Bynum, wasn't trying to pin down Linda Hoffman Pugh or Jeff Merrick, the two people the Ramseys initially suspected the most. Instead, just hours after the discovery of JonBenet's body, Bynum was trying to reach Fleet White to set up an interview before he could speak with anyone else. Maybe to find out what he had seen, heard, and thought. What do you think? Are you watching closely?